Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
He who fears being conquered is sure of defeat, is a quote from the French military and political leader Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to prominence during the French Revolution and was emperor of the First French Empire. I thought this was a fitting quote for our guest today, someone who reached the pinnacle of their craft as a leader with the right team, preparation, discipline, courage, focus and confidence. Our guest today is Nick Farr-Jones, AM, Director of Tourist Funds Management. Nick debuted for the Wallabies in 1984, making 63 appearances, 36 of those as captain between 1988 to 1992, including Australia's first Rugby World Cup success in 1991. He is also chairman of Stand Tall, a charity that supports the mental well-being of Australian youth. He has previously served on the boards of NRMA and Wesley Mission, been a councillor of the City of Sydney, a senator of the University of Sydney, and chairman of New South Wales Rugby Union. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Limitations, a show where we speak to elite, world-class performing men and women and unlock the secrets and influences that have shaped their destinies and that you can apply to your own life. For our first-time listeners from all over the world, please don't forget to follow on your preferred podcast platform and share with your friends and colleagues. And for our listeners in Italy, Fiji, and Chile, a big hello. I am your host, Greg Robinson, Managing Partner of Blendon Partners Executive Search and Board Advisory. In today's episode, we not only look back at the success of Australia in the historic 1991 World Cup, but also the key moments, years in the making, for Nick and the team, building character and resilience and striving for consistency at an elite level that led to ultimate glory. He shares with us the highlights of an illustrious career that has extended beyond the confines of the pitch as a lawyer, banker, and ambassador of the sport, and a striking similarity gleaned from an encounter with Sir Edmund Hillary. So sit back and enjoy. Don't look at the scoreboard. Nick, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Greg.
Nick, you're 29 years old, and you're coming off the ground in the second half in the 1991 quarter-final against Ireland in the World Cup. You're coming off with a knee injury. You're captain. Ireland score, 4 minutes left on the clock. You're sitting in the grandstand. Wallabies get the ball. Scrum set. 15 metres out from the Irish try line. There's a set play being called. What were you thinking sitting there in the stands?
Mate, I was thinking with, by that time, I mean, the Irish scored, as you said, with 4 minutes to go. That was probably 90 seconds to go. Scrum was in front. Leadership's an interesting thing. I reckon I would have put Michael Liner, my number 10, in my back pocket. I would have hit him and I would have said, Noddy, put a drop goal over and we'll go into extra time.
Okay.
But it was interesting because Michael had taken over the captaincy. I, as you say, went off after 20 minutes with a recurring knee injury. Michael decided to do things differently. We'd practiced until our noses bled a move in the back line, which was cut one double loop. Michael Liner, Jason Little going around Tim Horan. It didn't work to perfection, but it worked well enough that Campo was able to get a ball to Noddy, Michael Liner, and we went over, and I suppose the rest is history. I say about the leadership because for 2 years leading into that World Cup, or at least 18 months, we'd worked on process. Get the process right, the scoreboard looks after itself. And Michael Liner had the nerve as the guy who was calling the shots in my absence to call that move. Had it not come off, we would have been on a plane home the next day. I would have retired without doubt, and I'd still be looking at cracks in the ceiling getting wider at 60 years of age at 2 a.m. in the morning.
What's the essence then of captaincy?
Oh, there's a million things that go into it, and I think you've got to be yourself. When I first took over the captaincy, I would have thought my cab was parked about 8th in the rank. Never gave it a moment's thought, even though I'd sort of captained my school teams and my club team. But Bob Dwyer didn't talk to me. When he took over from Alan Jones in 1988, he was Randwick, I was Sydney Uni. I didn't know Bob Dwyer. I was in Monaco, of all places, with my wife playing a sevens tournament. And we got a phone call from my mother-in-law, of all people, who'd listened to the midday news, and she'd heard that I'd been made captain. So it's a bit of a bizarre story, but Bob Dwyer didn't even call me to say, Nick, I'm thinking of making you captain and having a chat, and let's go and have a coffee or a lunch. He just picked me. And I think I made some mistakes early on when I thought, golly, I'm not the most entitled person or the most senior person to captain this Australian team. And so I thought about what my predecessors did, Andrew Slack, Simon Poitevin, Steve Williams. And I think I made some mistakes in the early years. I probably changed from the natural person and natural leader that, Bob saw in me to a person who was perhaps a little fake. And I realised that I was selected because someone saw leadership qualities in me, and I just had to let it flow out. And there's a million things that go into leadership. It's experience, it's leading by example. I mean, I was pretty good at that because I was a swimmer when I was young, twice a day. Yep. When I was 3 hours on a train, I went to middle distance running. Perfect backgrounds for working your ass off. I love working my ass off, so I was always good at setting the example. I was an absolute stickler for training and getting things right. I used to get very annoyed if guys were lackadaisical around training, dropping balls, just laughing it off. That could really fire me up. So I was a stickler for, perfect practice, avoids piss poor performance. I think that's a part of leadership, but it's also understanding the importance of people, the importance of culture, the importance of leading, the importance of humility in success, the importance of learning from mistakes and never forgetting those disappointments. And, I suppose the most important thing is that team spirit aspect, and that comes from many ways. It comes from making everyone feel involved in what you're going after, the vision, the mission, the goals that you're setting, whether they're weekly, monthly, yearly. There's a million aspects to leadership, but I think the most important is the team spirit, which comes from understanding people, irrespective of what their title is. They don't have to take their boots to the game. They can be the gear steward. It doesn't mean that they're any lesser a person in your team. And, if we go back over the years, I'm pretty proud of the way we looked after the whole team. And I think also, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead when it's time to prepare.
Yep.
But it's what we call the on-off button. Switch the button on to off. Enjoy the wonderful opportunity of travelling the world and enjoying the hospitality of countries you're in. Enjoy a beer with your mates. The only rule we had was when it's time to switch it back on to on.
Yep.
At 7 o'clock the next morning, when you're going out to train, just don't do anything when it's on off, when you're having some fun.
Yep.
That's going to jeopardise or downplay what you got to do when it's on. When it's time to prepare to strut your stuff.
Who's driving that? Is that the coach? Was that the
look,
the
it's a bit
captain
of
who actually
everyone.
drives
The great thing about my 91 World Cup team was that we had a lot of leaders.
Okay.
Took a lot of pressure off me. But remember, Greg, I played in the amateur days.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
Go on.
So you could agitate, you could debate. Bob Dwyer, my coach, and I, we agitated a lot. We debated, we argued. We always got on the same page. But it wasn't like I'm challenging Bob with in the back of my mind, gee, I hope I get selected and I get my next contract for the next 3 years. It wasn't my livelihood. I was a lawyer when I was a player.
Yep.
So, it was a natural thing to do. I see captain coach very much like chief executive chairman in that way. And so, I think the job of a chairman of a corporate is very much to question the chief executive about his strategy, about his game plan, about his execution policy or the way he's going to execute it, and challenge it. That is the job of a chairman and the non-executive directors. And, you have to challenge that, and you have to make sure that everything that's in the game plan going forward for the corporate is backed up by full studies and full assumptions that are acceptable. And the chairman's job is to do that. And that's very much what I saw. Well, I was the chief executive, Bob was the chairman, the way I saw it.
Okay, but when you started off, you had a good win against England when you're skipper. Lost to Bledisloe.
And what year are you talking about, Greg?
88.
Oh, okay, when I started as skipper.
Yep.
Yeah.
89, we lost to the British Lions. Yep. Okay. Pressure's on, 1990.
Yep.
Bledisloe down, 2-0.
Yep.
Is it true you jumped in for a swim?
After Wellington.
Yep.
So when we won.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true, is it?
Well, Tim Horan and I, we were in a place called the Mont Desir. That was the name of the pub on the North Shore of Auckland. And Timmy came up to me as Tim's wont. He was only sort of about 18 or 19 back then. And he said, Farr, we're playing at Eden Park. He said, if we get up, and the hotel was on the North Shore and on the water.
Yep.
He said, what about we have a dip tonight? We didn't win that day. We went close. But we went on to win a week later in Wellington, and Tim came up to me. My wife was there, celebrating in whatever place we were at, 12 o'clock. And he said, hey, Farr, how about we follow through on what we promised in Auckland and Wellington? I mean, Wellington's on a harbour. So at about 1 or 2 in the morning, we went over and had a dip.
The pressure at the time, Nick.
Yeah, no, it was immense.
Yeah, okay. Because you're not getting the wins, you're captain.
No, Greg, the problem was the inconsistency.
Okay.
And that frustrated the hell out of me. And, as you rightly recall, we had one great match against the All Blacks in 88 in Brisbane. We drew that. We should have won. We had 2 lousy matches at that unloved inner western ground called Concord Oval. The greatest frustration, and the only thing that, here as I talk to you at the age of 60, 30 years into retirement,
yep,
you get one roll of the dice against the British Lions.
Yeah,
the team made up of England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. They only come to Australia every 12 years. We beat them 4-0 in Sydney Football Stadium. I think it was the first time we played at Moore Park. Playing fantastic rugby, great defence. We went up to Brisbane, got bashed up, lost by, I think, 5 or 6 points. And then the deciding test, people always talk about the Campese incident at the end when we led. Campo, sort of, as was his wont, and I'll totally defend that, and I'll go to my grave, and I was vindicated because what happened in 91. Campo probably should have done something differently, but he was never going to die wondering if he could beat the tackle. So he set off upfield, tried to beat some tackles, didn't, got himself in trouble, threw a ball to a unsuspecting Greg Martin, and the rest is history. They won. But the disappointment about that was the inconsistency of the performance. And particularly then when we went to France, beat the French by about 25 points in Strasbourg. 7 days later, we're going to become the first Australian team to win a series on French soil. Never happened before. And we played like busted bums. We made a million mistakes and we handed the game to the French. And it was after that we went away for a weekend, coach, assistant coach, captain, vice captain, and we pulled corks out of red wine bottles. We looked at the last 2 years of inconsistency, and we actually came up with a well-devised plan as to changing the culture of the team.
Talk us through that.
As I said, we looked at those 2 years.
Yep.
And the performances that I've just talked about.
Yeah, and you've got a very good team.
Particularly the French second test.
Yep.
For some reason, we didn't play a test in Paris. It was up in Lille. Lille is in, the northern part of France,
yep,
where, we had so many Anzac sacrifices. I lived in Paris for 4 years, yes, when I joined Société Générale, a French bank. I've been up there many times. I went there, took my young kids to the Anzac Day, Villers-Bretonneux and all that. The particular day that we played that second test was the 11th of the 11th. It was Remembrance Day.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was very moving. And the great Bob Templeton, who we lost too long ago, back in about 2000, 2001, we went to Villers-Bretonneux. He read the Ode to the Fallen. we went out that day, the French had made 8 changes to their team, including dropping the mercurial Serge Blanco. To cut to the chase, and it's a long time ago, we made a million mistakes. They beat us by about 4 points. And on the long flight home, I remember being very emotional. It was the end of 2 days of very inconsistent performance, some fantastic games and some very lousy games. I got pretty emotional, and I wasn't sure that I was a good captain, and I wasn't sure that captaincy helped my game. And I'd drunk too much on the plane home. And about 4 hours out of Sydney, I went up to my coach, Bob Dwyer, and said, Bob, I've been giving this a lot of thought in the last day. Can you find yourself another captain? I don't think I'm good at it. I think it negatively impacts my game. And about an hour and a half out of Sydney, Bob given it a couple of hours of thought, and he said, Nick, he said, if there's a camera or a microphone when we get home, please don't say anything. Don't get emotional. He knew I'd probably had a couple too many drinks. He said, what I've thought of doing, and we did, was Tempo, Bob, Michael Lyon and myself, we went away to the Gold Coast for a weekend. And what we actually very quickly, Greg, came up with, I mean, it was a lot of looking at video, trying to analyse our emotions that day, particularly in Lille, but also during the Lions matches. You might think after beating them by 25, 30 points at Strasbourg in the first test that the problem was complacency, but it was quite the reverse. We were too desperate to win.
Yeah, there's an art of winning, isn't there?
Yeah, well, we were desperate to win. Every time we got near the line, we wanted to get the ball over the line. It's what they call in sort of under 10 rugby, white line fever.
Yep.
Kids get close to the line. They forget every aspect of structure, every aspect of what they've been taught, and they just look at the white line and try and get across, and it often results in mistakes, drop ball, handing it over to the opposition. We, as the best rugby team in Australia, were guilty of the same thing. What we tried to, and effectively did after about 6 months, was introduce what we called get the process right.
Mm-hmm.
Try and ignore the scoreboard. It's bloody difficult when you're playing a World Cup final against the English at Twickenham to ignore the scoreboard, because there's only going to be one winner. There's only going to be one team that's remembered. And people will often say, well, what's process in rugby, Nick? And it goes way beyond the 80 minutes. But I think one of the unique things about rugby, there's a position for everyone. You know, when I came into the game at the age of 13, 14, where do I play? It was easy. The littlest kid, here's a number 9 jersey. You know, every body shape has got a position in the team. And there's often quite different roles that you have to play. And so me as a scrum half, what's my job? Of course, it's my bread and butter, which is my passing, the speed of my passing, the accuracy of my passing. It's my defensive game, my organisation of the defensive people around me. It's my short side game. It's my kicking game, my offensive and defensive kicking. It's my lateral vision, which is really critical because I get first use of possession often. So 9.5 times out of 10, my judgment's got to be right.
Yep.
I need to know where the black jerseys are and where the gold jerseys are. I need to know where the space is. When I'm confident, I can see 270 degrees. When I lose confidence, the lateral vision comes in.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And so they're all the aspects of my game. So process for my game in the 80 minutes. And as I said, it goes way beyond it. It's everything you do in preparation. But that process for me is doing those roles as well as I possibly can, including communicating with all the critical people around me and forgetting the captaincy role, which is another thing on top of that.
Yep.
It's minimizing the errors. Okay. It's trusting the 14 people around me to do exactly the same thing. In my day, in amateur days, you didn't get replaced voluntarily. You had to have a medically verified injury. It's trusting those 14 around me in all their distinctive roles in the game to do exactly the same. And then at the end of the 80 minutes, look up and see what the scoreboard tells you. As I said, Greg, it's bloody hard when you're playing a World Cup final or you're in a Bledisloe Cup clash or you're playing the Springboks. And did we get it overnight? No, it took us probably 6 months. But the last 25 tests that I played in the early 90s, I think we won about 21, 22 of those games. We became a very consistent team, and I put it down to you get the process right, the scoreboard looks after itself.
So the old discussion, Nick, is it the best team of individuals or the best team?
It's the best team, but the best team has to be made up of great individuals.
So
Bob Dwyer rightly said, Greg, that to win a World Cup, you need 5 guys in your 15 that'll pick themselves in a World 15 automatically.
Right.
You need 5 guys on the fringe of that team, and you need 5 guys that will absolutely pick themselves automatically in a national 15. And that's about what we had in 91. You know, we were gifted with that. I mean, I can talk this process thing. You're in search and what have you. I can talk it across a whole bunch of range. I mean, golf. I love golf.
Yep.
How many times, you know, I don't play a lot, so I might have got to the 13th hole and you think you're going to break 80 for the first time, and all of a sudden you start to think about the scoreboard, breaking the 80. 5 holes later, you're lucky to break 90. It's like when I was a young lawyer. I'd go into the senior partner's office at the end of the financial year.
Yep.
You know, for my annual review, I can still remember going into Mr. Holton's office on Blythe Street, where you work. And, you know, he'd basically do the annual review. It'd take 10 minutes. You know, he'd basically say, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've made budget this year.
Yep.
Because of that and, you know, the prospects in front, I've decided to increase your budget by 20%. I mean, I'd crap myself, Greg. How am I going to do that? But if you follow the process, which unfortunately in law is accounting for every 6 minutes of your day, it's called a worksheet, a timesheet.
Yep.
And if you do that, get the process right at the end of 30 June, bang, you know, you've made budget. I mean, one of the stories I love.
This is the old saying, almost going back to basics, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely, it is.
And
But minimising the errors,
Yep.
doing your job as well as you can. I mean, the days when we played the All Blacks, we all know the All Blacks in the last 4 or 5 months have had unprecedented losses.
Yep.
You know, they probably lost 75% of their games. When I played them, and I'm not saying it was harder when I played them, don't get me wrong, but I seriously remember you wouldn't count the mistakes they made on one hand. And now you're seeing them sometimes making 10, 12, 15 mistakes. But that's what it is, minimising the errors. I mean, that in that World Cup in 91, we conceded 1 try in the quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's not making errors. It's simplifying things, but it's doing things that individually, and then it becomes collectively, if all the 15 do it together, doing things as well as you can. And that comes into all those aspects that I talked about in my game. For the number one, they're totally different things that he's got to do. But he knows what he's got to do. And he's trained to do that, and he's prepared to do that. For me, there's no example like it that Sir Anthony O'Reilly, the great Irish rugby player, winger, and British Lions, and, you know, he owned Waterford Wedgwood, he owned independent newspapers. A great rugby man, a great businessman. He ran Heinz for 30 years. But he invited me, I was lucky enough, I think it was 2007, to join a bunch of his advisory board for the 3rd test in Auckland against the British Lions. So this was when the Lions toured New Zealand for 3 tests.
Yep.
Last test at Eden Park. You know, we had a fantastic few days. And at the end of the match, who should come into our box for a beer? And I got chatting with him, but Sir Edmund Hillary.
Oh, right.
And I was an amazing admirer of Hillary and what he did, you know, being the first to go up the mountain. And I'd read a biography, and I introduced myself. We had a beer. He was in his 80s back then. And from memory, in 2007, it was 50 years after he went up the mountain.
Even Tenzing Norgay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of the story. At the end of our 10-minute chat, and he was looking to go, I asked him, I said, "Sir, would you mind if I asked you a question? I've read your biography."
Yep.
He said, "No, not at all." And I said, if I ever met you, I'd always want to know, did you ever look up and think, I'm not going to get there? He said, "Nick, believe it or not, I never ever looked up at the top of the mountain." He said, "Had I done that, I suspect there's a good chance I wouldn't get there. But what I knew I could do because of the guy you just mentioned, the team I had around me, my training, my discipline, my courage, my focus, I knew I could keep on putting my left foot in front of my right. And if I kept on putting my left foot in front of my right, I knew I'd get to the top of the mountain, to the top of Everest." And to me, that is a great example of process. You get the process right. And I mentioned it's not just throwing your left in front of your right. It's the team, the preparation, the discipline, the courage, the focus, all those things.
It's also in the management of personalities.
Yeah, absolutely, because there was a big team around them.
And some big personalities around them.
For sure.
How did you go about doing that? Because you do have some big personalities and absolute superstars.
Oh, look, yeah,
That's got to be one of the hardest parts of being the skipper, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, you put me on the spot there, and I'm not sure how to answer that, because I just think it was part of natural leadership and knowing how to deal with people, and knowing that your position was warranted in the team and the people respected you for a whole bunch of reasons. I think if you know you've got respect from your teammates, And that comes from track record.
Yep.
You know, you've got to have a track record of consistency as a leader and as a player. And as someone who enjoys, you know, the touring aspect and friendship. And, you know, when we tour, I would always make sure that we left a legacy. I'd always make sure that we looked after a not-for-profit. I was always pretty tough on the guys in relation to, you know, sometimes on a day off, the guys just wanted to relax and do their own thing. And sometimes I'd say, guys, we're actually going to go to this lawn bowling club in New Zealand because we've been invited.
Yep.
You mightn't like it, but we're going to go along and support them and help them. And the guys might, you know, a couple of the guys might say, oh, you know, Farr, give me a break. And, you know, we don't want to do that. But at the end of the day, they'd have a fantastic time. And to me, leadership rugby touring was about leaving legacies. And it was very much the way you behaved when you either pulled on that gold jersey or you pulled on that bottle green blazer that we used to hate, but we were so respectful of.
Yes.
I mean, to me, the way we conducted ourselves was critical. And so I think that, you know, hopefully, ask my teammates, but hopefully they respected the way I led that team on and off the field.
Grand Slam. Hasn't been done again. Pretty special team.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time. Great memories. I mean, we played 18 matches on that trip. We scored 12 tries in those 4 tests, conceded 1. Mark Ella got 1 in every try. I mean, I had the wonderful privilege of playing my first 4 tests alongside Mark, and then he retired. So for many, many reasons, it was just a wonderful memory. It was a great team. It was very well coached by Jones, very well led by Andrew Slack, but we had such a fantastic time. And I think we were great ambassadors for the country, you know, in many, many ways. People still talk about that team when you go to the UK and Ireland. People who are my age and older, they still talk about that amazing team. And to play my first 4 tests in that team, something you can never get taken from you. It was, for many reasons, it was just hugely special. You got to remember, I was playing second division rugby the year before.
That's right.
For Sydney University. So that tour gave me an opportunity mainly to meet my teammates. You know, I remember saying to Mark Ella before the first test, your number 10s normally either want it a bit higher, a bit lower. They sometimes want to run onto it a bit quicker or what have you. I remember saying to Mark, because we were roomed together at the St Edmunds Hotel in Westminster, I said, Mark, we've only played a handful of games together. Where do you prefer the ball? You know, on your hip, on your in front? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Nick, you do the chucking, I'll do the catching. You know, he was that laid-back sort of a person, you know, that taking the pressure off me. You just do the passing. Don't worry about the catching. I'll catch it wherever you put it. He was that good a player.
How nervous were you?
I knew I'd done the work.
But had you done enough for that time?
Yeah, look, I'd played 4 years of first grade. I just was confident. But you got to remember, I didn't have the same responsibility. You know, when you become captain, a lot more responsibility, decision-making and all that. But by that time, you're experienced and it comes naturally. My job in that first match against England...
Get the ball to Ella.
Get the ball to Mark as efficiently and as quickly as I could. That was my job. It was the same in Ireland. When we got to Cardiff, the conditions were lousy. That's when my game as a scrum half had to change because we had to play strategically. We scored 2 or 3 of our tries down the short side.
Yeah, right.
And I played the house down because I had to step up. And I knew it was a greater responsibility because I had to control the game a lot more. You couldn't play quite the expansive game that we had previously. And when Mark takes over. Yeah. So no, but it was a great, great memory.
The actual captaincy itself, Nick, what's the weight of the responsibility?
Yeah, I don't think I ever thought about that during the captaincy. Yeah. You know, when you're playing for your nation, you know, when there's a lot of people that support you and are watching on TV that it's fair dinkum, but why on earth would you doubt that it's fair dinkum when you have that great responsibility, pulling on that jersey, belting out your anthem, playing in front of thousands at the stadium and, you know, hopefully millions watching on TV. But again, I always come back to you. If you know that you've got leadership qualities, if you know that you've done the preparation, you can go out there and be confident. And as I say, down the torpedoes, full speed ahead, just go out and let it all come out. let it all come out in the way you strut your stuff and the way you lead your team and the decision making that you make, and just get on with it.
What's changed in the role of captaincy from the amateur to the professional?
I don't know. I haven't been a part of the professional.
You don't reckon?
I reckon
you reckon in your old days
Greg,
you would have made more decisions yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, sure.
Rather than looking to the coach or the the support team?
I think maybe, as I said to you, at the beginning of this podcast, Bob and I debated, argued. We always got on the same page. Bob and I have been great mates for a long, long time. We still are. Ange, my wife Ange, and Ruth, Bob's wife, we get on wonderfully. We go down to Bowral, down the Southern Highland, and catch up. But we did agitate, we did debate, we did argue. Maybe when Alan Jones was coach, my first coach, people wouldn't take him on as much. I don't know, because Alan, he was very much an authoritarian, but he was a great coach in the same time. But I reckon, to answer your question, Greg, as well as I can, I think the modern day captain, depending on how strong they are, probably don't question the coach's ways as much. I think that's perhaps a natural assumption. That's why, in my view, you often get robotic play, because people are scared to make a mistake. They worry too much about their next contract. And so you just get all this one-up stuff of rucks and mauls. They don't want to make a mistake. They're not prepared to, sort of deviate out of the game plan. They don't want to make a mistake because, that'll be marked against them.
So what changed for you? You're sitting at the front of the plane. Well, Bob was sitting at the front of the plane. You've had, like you said, a few glasses of wine. He said, don't say anything to the press.
We weren't sitting at the front of the plane.
Okay,
we always flew economy.
Okay. All right, things have changed then.
Yeah.
Where did the confidence come back, and how did it come back?
I didn't lose confidence. Sometimes I might lose some. You mean as captain? Okay. But sometimes I might lose confidence as a number 9. I worked out how quickly to get that back, because it's really critical to get it back. A guy who's 15 years older than me, who was a great number 9 at Sydney University, I would just say, Johnny, can I bring 4 balls down a number 1 oval? I just want you to look over my passing and my technique and all that. And we might spend an hour down there and going through it. And as soon as he gave me a tick in the box, he said, Nick, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, go for it. It's perfect. That's how I would get my technique, passing, play confidence back. In relation to the team, I just continue to work really hard, and as a leader, I just continue to work hard. We worked on building that culture in 1990, and going back to the tour of New Zealand you spoke about, after the loss in Christchurch, then the loss in Auckland, there was pressure. Bob felt it coming from a Queensland coach that wanted to usurp him, and I felt it coming from a Queensland player that wanted to usurp me. There was a little bit of a political play on, there's no doubt. But when we got over the line in Wellington, we're off to the races. I knew then, and that day, that night, that we had the edge on New Zealand.
So what changed for that game, you think? You just got done. You just been done in the last 2.
I actually had lunch with Richard Hadley a couple of days before. Michael Liner was there. And he just talked about... there was a guy who was knighted over there who was a big property tycoon who I knew well, and Michael Liner ended up working for, but he put us together with Richard. And I just remember him speaking about the positivity and about just being really positive and just filling the changing room with, before you go out there, with win. And we did. And we went out there and played the house down, and I think we won about 21-9 or 10. Yep. But I knew from there that with a young team going forward, the likes of Kearns, Daly, McKenzie, Willie O, John Eales wasn't in the team yet, Tim Horan, Jason Little, Rob Edgerton, that we're only going to get better. I think that they made some mistakes in their leadership selection. They dropped Buck Shelford. Yes. I won't go into too much about that, but I think that played in our hands. Yep. We played the next year, 1991, 2 matches for the Bledisloe. We beat them at the Sydney Football Stadium about a similar score, 22-10. Rob Edgerton plucked a ball out of John Kerwin's hands. It was a fantastic win. We went over to win the Bledisloe to Eden Park in Auckland. We lost 6-3. Mike Liner it's not a criticism, but he had a bad day at the office. He missed 5 shots for goal. And I was in Auckland about 2 months ago, Greg, and I remember going into the city with a guy that is a good mate. And as we drove from the airport into the CBD of Auckland, we drove past the Ellerslie racecourse. And 2 months ago, I said, mate, that's where we won the World Cup in 91. He said, what are you talking about? That's where we had our after-match dinner. And when we lost 6-3. Mm-hmm. So the All Blacks had retained the Bledisloe. We'd lost it again, as in it was 1-1, but they retained it.
Yep.
And we have, after every match, what we call a happy hour, but that wasn't very happy that particular evening before the dinner. And I'll never forget when we got in a group at the end of that happy hour before we went to the after-match dinner, and I just remember saying to the guys, do not forget the feeling that we have now, because I think there's a good chance that we'll play these guys again in 2 months in the World Cup in a knockout match like we did in the semi-final in Dublin. I said, bottle the way you feel now. And I knew that when we played them in the semi-final, we'd smash them because of that disappointment. So you've got to, leadership, building teams is about learning from your mistakes, about remembering things, about, as I said, bottling that experience. The semi-final at Dublin, Lansdowne Road, was arguably one of the best games I was ever involved in.
You still had a dodgy knee?
It was fine that day.
Okay.
Yeah. I jarred it against Ireland. I buggered it against Samoa in a pool game.
Yep.
I jarred it. As it turned out, I probably could have stayed on against Ireland, but I thought I'd buggered it again. It was just jarred.
Yep.
And literally within 2 minutes of coming off, it was okay. So, probably one of the few times that Greg Craig, my physio, who was a genius, maybe got it wrong. But no, it was absolutely fine for the next two games, the semi and the final.
And you're playing the mighty All Blacks?
Yeah, no, but I knew we had their measure. It was from Wellington the year before, and it was from the Eden Park loss and bottling the disappointment, the absolute bitter disappointment. And we're on a hot tin roof. Normally, Greg, what happens when you have your team meetings before you go to the game? We have a backs meeting, we have a forwards meeting. You then get together for a team meeting. The coach speaks maybe for 5-10 minutes, about the way we want to go about it, the tactics and what have you. And then I speak as a captain before we hop on the bus. There was absolutely nothing to be said that day. I hardly said one thing. All I did was read a letter that we got from a guy that we knew who loved rugby, loved the essence and the spirit of the Wallabies. He sent us a letter talking about how he perceived the team and the spirit within the team. All I had to do was read. I said, guys, let's get on the bus. There was nothing to be said in the change room. We were on a hot tin roof.
What did the letter say, Nick?
Oh, look, it was from a wonderful guy called Matt Laffin. His father was my New South Wales coach, Dick Laffin. Matt was born and quickly developed this. It was like a spina bifida disease, so he lived in a wheelchair. Right. When I was on the council of the City of Sydney and I chaired the access committee, all aspects of accessibility around the city. Getting into buildings, accessibility, it's for the hearing impaired, for the sight impaired. I quadrupled the budget. Matt was the first guy I put onto my committee.
Right.
And he would take me out in the city and just show me areas where he didn't have accessibility. And we changed that. Matt was an amazing guy. As Peter Fitzsimons said in a eulogy, he passed away in about 2007. My first daughter was lucky to have him as a godfather. But Fitz in the eulogy said he was dealt a pair of black twos and he played them like red aces. It's how he lived his life. But he just wrote us a letter, about a page and a half, and just talked about how he loved the Wallabies. He loved the example we set. He loved our spirit and all that sort of stuff and what we were doing during that World Cup. And I just read it and I said, on the bus, guys, let's go. Let's go and do this stuff. And, it was a big day. It was one of the greatest games, as I said, the 65 tests I played that, both in attack and defence. It was terrific.
You're listening to No Limitations with special guest Nick Farr-Jones. In our next episode, I sit down with Scott Wyatt, Chief Executive Officer of Viva Energy Australia.
It's easily achievable for us. I think we talk about our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which is the emissions that we create as an organisation. And we said for our non-refining business that we'll be net zero by 2030. So that's retail and commercial and head offices and our terminals, etc. The refinery, we haven't set that time frame. We've said net zero across the whole business by 2050, and that's because the nature of the refining business is it's hugely emissions intensive.
Be sure to join us on our next episode. And now, back to the show.
How much in the game, Nick, when you're playing the game, from the strategy and the preparation, the drilling, etc.,
actually comes out to play? The actual strategy to
we don't,
playing what's in front of you.
Look, we practice moves and all that.
Yeah.
And you play those.
Yeah.
And you know the way that the All Blacks will defend. And, I mean, that team, we would have often two major strategies around beating the All Blacks. Grant Fox, their number 10, if he played well, if he was given time and space and he played well, we lose.
Yep.
Okay? So a lot of our game plan was around, and this is simplifying things, but denying Fox
the ball,
time and space.
Yep.
Time and space.
Yep.
You got to get in his
Crowd
face.
him.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And the other guy that was really instrumental in that tremendous success that the All Blacks had in the late 80s, particularly the 87 World Cup, the inaugural World Cup, through to the mid-90s was Michael Jones. And he had an amazing speed, mobility. And if he was in Liner's face, Horan's face, Little's face, we'd lost again. So a lot of our tactics are around putting him in deep, dark places, making sure he makes a lot of tackles and he gets buried at the bottom of mauls. So he's not in our guy's face and we can play. We have space. Game's pretty simple. It's about creating space and it's about denying space in defence. And so that was simple tactics. But around that, I think one of the great things of the amateur days, again, and the way Bob coached, and also Alan Jones, you got the best players in the country. Give them a license. Give them a license. I mean, I often talk about, when Campo made that mistake, I spoke briefly about it, the third test against the Lions, the press crucified him.
Yes.
They said, even the great Andrew Slack, my first captain, as a journalist, said you can't pick him again. He's too much of a liability. This grew and grew and grew after that Saturday test. And eventually, I think on the Friday, I, as a young captain, wrote an open letter to papers. It was published in it's in Fitzsimon's biography of me. But basically what I said in defence of Campo, because he was one of the greatest players I ever played with, and we had a great combination. I said, Campo, you made a mistake on Saturday, and I'm sure you'll learn from it. But it didn't cost us the game. We had 79 other minutes in which to win that game. And I said, mate, if I was picking the team tomorrow, you would be the first player that I would select. And most importantly, without shackles. If Bob Dwyer had have said to Campo, I'm going to give you another go, but thou shalt kick out on the full in your 22, you would have destroyed the essence of what the guy was about. He was always prepared to walk the tightrope. He was always prepared, or he was never going to die wondering if he could beat the tackle. And I'm sure I was vindicated in 91 when, without doubt, he was the player of that tournament. You probably don't know, Greg, but at the end of every Rugby World Cup, all the journalists that cover it, print and television, they get to vote player of the tournament.
Yep.
And in 91, and we're talking about a winger, a number 11, there was about 150 journalists. It was unanimous.
Yeah. Really?
Absolutely.
Unanimous.
If you think back to what he did against Ireland, against particularly New Zealand, even against England in the final, when he didn't get many chances because we didn't get a lot of possession, but even in the pool matches, he was phenomenal. And so, again, I go back to that vindication about giving people a license. I think in business, really, really important to create a culture within your business, particularly for young people, that allows people to make a mistake. If you make a million mistakes, you don't get a jersey. You get warned and you learn hopefully from it. But I think in business, it's really important to give young people a chance to chance their arm, to think outside the square, to do things differently. And you're going to make mistakes. When you walk the tightrope of life, of course you're going to. But it's about learning. It's about experience. It's about having a crack, which I think is a really important thing.
So when you beat the All Blacks and you got the English next for the final, this is the very peak of it. Were we going to win in your mind?
Yeah.
No doubt?
Oh, look, we had to play well. We had to turn up. There's a lot of things that we had to go through. There's a lot of things that were different, that you had to adjust to. I mean, normally you get that knock on the door, you go out, you sing a couple of anthems and you're into it, unless you're facing a haka. We had 18 minutes between the knock on the door and kickoff, so things were different. The forwards couldn't get too fired up and aroused and, headbutting walls. I mean, I had to introduce the team to the Queen. And the reserves, Will Carling had to do the same, and then you had the anthem. So there was 18 minutes. There was a lot of things different. But I just knew we'd done the work, and we had done the work, and that's why I had the level of confidence I did.
You always been confident?
Yeah, to an extent. I think so. I get confident because of the people around me. I mean, I did individual sports, as I said, when I was young, and I was always, because I know I'd done the work. But, you talk about individually and corporately, collectively. And, we had prepared the team, and when I talked about changing the culture and about understanding process, we'd developed that over 2 years, and we'd become a very consistent team. When we lost that 6-3 match in Eden Park, I was ropeable. I was pissed off. There's not many people, Australian captains, that would be absolutely pissed off when you lose to New Zealand by 3 points. But that's where we'd got to, our level of confidence.
Yep.
That every time we go out there and strut our stuff, we're expected to win.
So how much is it up here?
Oh, look, there's a lot of that, but that comes from the hard work. And look, at the end of the day, I think you've got to have a level of intelligence. You've got to have a level of experience. I often think, I'd love to have $1, Greg, for every time someone said to me in the last 30 years, so what did you do after rugby? And you must be, pissed off you missed out on the money on the professional side of the game because it came along 2 or 3 years after I stopped. And I look those people squarely in the eyes and say, I think I was the last of the lucky ones. Because I was able to study at Sydney Uni and do law. I had a day job. When I didn't get carried out in my coffin, my rugby coffin, I stopped on my terms. I had a couple of young kids. I wanted to get on with other things in life. I'd, sort of apart from not beating the Lions, everything else we'd achieved, particularly when South Africa came back into the landscape because they weren't a part of the 91 World Cup. But the great thing about amateurism was you had a day job. We kicked off at 3:00, back in those days. Why is that important? Because, I lived in France for 4 years. It's what they call the troisième mi-temps, the third half.
Yes.
So you kick off at 3:00. At 5:00, you're in their changing room or they're in your changing room and you're having a beer and you're getting to know people and you're going to a dinner with them after. So you're not going to press conferences at 10:00. It's the great tours. My first tour in 84 was 10 weeks. We only played 7 test matches a year on average. Those tours were fantastic because you got out of major cities. Nowadays, they're playing 14 tests to get the recurrent income that pays for the professional game. They go on tour for 4 weeks. They might go to Dublin, Edinburgh, London, Cardiff, maybe Paris. They don't get outside. And I think those great tours that I experienced, those 10-week tours, 18 matches, they're just, you can't trade anything for those experiences. So there was all those things that I loved about the amateur game and all the mateship and camaraderie and friendship, not just with your teammates, but people that you played against around the world.
Is team spirit different, you think, these days?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I'm not on the inner sanctum, so I really don't want to comment. I'd like to think it would be. I'd like to think that there's the same sacrifice, there's the same spirit there, but I just don't know. One thing that makes my antenna vibrate nervously is the influence of player agents and whether they're really looking after the long-term interests of their clients or whether they're just looking at what's going to pay the most and then they get their cut, whether it's to run off to Japan or France or the UK because they're going to pay the most. And is that best for their client? I sometimes doubt that that's the right thing. I see some of these great young schoolboys that end up going to league and I wish I could speak to their parents and sit down and have a coffee or a beer and tell them about my experience and everything that rugby had to offer because there's a lot of things that money can never pay for.
I guess one of the questions, Nick, I was going to ask you about is how far is too far in the effort to win?
Do you mean in relation to drugs and
Correct.
Things? Oh, look, just play by the laws. Play by the laws. I've absolutely always, I would never, ever contemplate any of those things. Why would you need to? Greg, I've never been in a gymnasium in my life.
Okay.
It might surprise you.
Yeah, it does.
But I was absolutely equipped physically, strength-wise, to play and excel at my position. You do it different ways. But I just don't I never bought into that, the need to go into and do weights. I was super fit all the time, and I did a lot of using my own body weight to get the strength that I needed to play. So I've never been one who's needed even to think about enhancements or anything like that. And I'm pretty sure none of my teammates would have back then.
So when did you decide, Nick, that I've got an opportunity to get to the top in rugby? What age did when did it click in?
Really, I mean,
Because
I love sport.
Yeah.
I didn't play first 15 at my school.
So were you a natural, hard work? Where would you put it all?
Yeah, I was absolutely natural at hard work. But you've got to remember, Greg, back at school, I played a lot of sport.
Yep.
When I went to Sydney University, most of those other sports got carved off because of lack of time.
Yep.
I got picked at a very young age, 18, to play first grade for Sydney University. I was alongside people like Michael Hawker and a few other Wallabies. When all those other sports got carved off and I grew a bit, all of a sudden I was just a regular selection in first grade. I started to play the house down. I saw my first rugby test the year before I played one. I went out and watched Australia play Argentina in 1983 at the Sydney Cricket Ground.
Right.
And the next year I'm playing in one. So I never really had a huge ambition to be a Wallaby. But one thing I did have a strong desire for was to never die wondering how good I could be. And it was from that led naturally to pulling on the gold jersey.
Where did that come from? Did that come from mum and dad?
Yeah, a little bit. And my grandfather, I see it very much in my eldest daughter. She absolutely excels in investment and finance. She's only 31. She had 4 years with JP Morgan, 1 year in New York. She now works in one of Australia's largest hedge funds. But she has my absolute drive when it comes to business that I had in sport. I've never quite had that same drive and focus in business, albeit I've loved business. I've loved everything I've done in business. But I love being around a good team and doing my job and working out exactly where I fit into that team within a business environment. But I see in my eldest daughter that absolute drive that I had in sport. Absolutely.
And supported at school? There was a special teacher at school who looked after you?
Yeah, there was a couple. One guy, and I gave eulogies at both their funerals. Yeah. My first rugby coach, who was my geography teacher, a guy called Clive Woosnam, Welshman, who was in the Sydney Welsh choir. Being a Welshman, he loved rugby. But he was the first guy when I turned up and I said, where are the round balls? Because I played soccer when I was a young kid in the Shire.
Yep.
He said, Nick, at Newington, we don't play with round balls. We play with this. So I said, where do I go? Where's my position? He said, it's easy. The littlest kid is number 9 jersey. But he was a wonderful man. And then there was a guy called Barry Rex, who was my maths teacher, but he was basically my mentor in athletics. And we did all the tactics and how to win an 800 metres and a 1,500 metres at the GPS.
When the final whistle blew and we've won the World Cup, I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times, but what actually is the feeling?
Oh, look, I think it was I was exhausted physically and mentally. I was a little bit unwell beforehand. I think when all the pressure, came on, and the only times I get crook, Greg, when I'm hugely under pressure. And on the Wednesday before the final, I was in bed.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it was, I knew it was just because of, and I don't get, it's very irregular. But the night of the final, we were at a 1,500 people dinner in downtown London, one of those stuffy, hot winter nights. And I ended up in the toilet, and this is about 8:30, and I had to speak around 9 o'clock. And I went out to my vice captain, Michael Liner, and I said, Noddy, I've just been really, really crook. I got to get out of here. And our hotel was about an hour out of town. And I said, Noddy, you're going to have to take over the speaking tonight. And Noddy'd been on the grog, from celebrating. And he said, no, I can't do that, Nick. I said, well, mate, I'm out of here. You're going to have to. I was the only guy who was sober the next day, effectively, because I was crook again. Okay, so you asked me the question, what was it like?
Yeah.
It was relief, because we'd worked our asses off. We'd worked so damn hard. It was so important to me, because I knew it was my last roll of the dice for World Cups, that to actually achieve what we deserved to achieve as the best rugby team in the world, it was just relief. As you get further away from it, we're now 31 years, you have different feelings and what have you. But at the time, it was just, thank God we got there. It was a lot of pressure. You asked me about pressure before. I knew we could do it. I was confident we'd win. But you still got to do it.
Nick, at the end of the day, this conversation's around leadership. Are you impressed in the way you see people conduct themselves, the leaders of today, in sport?
Oh, look, that's a
big,
very
wide
broad question.
I know that.
Yeah, generally, I think a lot of them do, whether it's in administration or on the field. We can all be critical and all that, but let's remember that we're all fallible. That's why a guy hung on the cross, because we all bugger up. I mean, it's a very broad question, Greg. If you ask me a specific question on a specific person, I probably wouldn't comment because it's going publicly. But you have your great leaders out there that you're full of admiration, and you have some people that behave shabbily and don't make good decisions, and you often see that they're self-interested rather than team interested and what have you. But again, I don't want to be too critical because I don't have a white halo around my head. If I go back on my days as a leader of a sporting team, I didn't make every step perfectly. I didn't do everything right. I had my cock-ups. So I think two really important qualities: humility, which I'd like to think I've got a little bit of. And I say that both individually and corporately because I've never ever got carried away with the success of my team. And I'm always so thankful for the opportunities that were given. And sometimes I'm reminded about how we impacted people, and I'm so thankful about that, even without sort of having remembered it or thinking about it. And the other quality, I suppose, is leaving a legacy. And my team definitely left a legacy. I still get people coming up to me and just talking about those days when they so much loved the game, they loved the individuals. That day when we had the ticker tape parade, I tried to get it called off.
Why?
Up George Street, because I thought no one would turn up. I called Nick Griner, who was the then Premier.
All right.
I thought 50 people would turn up, my parents included. And they reckon there was 130,000. So when you're a long way away, 23,000 miles or wherever it was, kilometres, you don't understand the support you're getting, even though we got thousands of faxes. You just don't understand the way that 91 win influenced people who loved rugby and even didn't know much about rugby. They reckon 130,000 people turned up between Circular Quay and Town Hall. I mean, remember, they were 10 deep. The legacy was important, and I'm very proud of that.
So jump me back again. You win the World Cup, Nick. Is that the greatest moment in your sporting achievements?
Oh, look, I think it'll be chiselled on my rugby tombstone.
Yeah, or is there anything that we don't know about in the deepest, darkest hours where you're training by yourself and you sit back and say, if I didn't get myself through that, that was my greatest moment? Is there anything...
Look, I think that win in Wellington was critical. What were the most important games that I played in? That Wellington win was critical. That when South Africa opened up and we beat them 26-3 at Newlands in Cape Town, the pressure on us in 92 was unbelievable. Mandela was released in 90. F.W. de Klerk, the then president, declared, I think in about March of 92, that he was going to have democratic elections for the first time in 94. So the African National Congress agreed to opening up cricket and rugby, and we toured simultaneously with the All Blacks. But I'll never forget the pressure that I felt as a captain. The Afrikaners largely, okay, so the people, the Dutch who loved rugby, the number of times they'd come up and say effectively something like, Nick, congratulations on winning what you perceived to be a World Cup last year, but we weren't a part of it, so you've won nothing. And the pressure that I felt in playing them after their hiatus was immense. But then to beat them by a record score, in the history of Springbok rugby, they'd never lost by 23 points, was one of the great feelings that I had. It was just sensational. I actually decided, and I told Mum and Dad that night, and I wrote them a letter and gave, I think, Mum the Krugerrand that I got from Darnie Craven and Dad the touch judge flag, and just to thank them for their great support. Mum missed one test that I ever played. Dad missed about 4. But I decided that before the matches, it was going to be my last game. I just wanted to get the job done. And the scrum half, Peter Slattery, got injured the next year, and I played 4 more tests. So the All Blacks and 3 against the Springboks when they toured Australia.
And what's your reflections on that now? Best thing you did?
Play the 4 more tests?
Yeah, to come back again.
Look, I got a call from the coaches and from the team leaders, and they said, yeah, would you come back? Absolutely. I mean, to bow out in our country to win the series, in great style against the Springboks was a nice way to go out. But that was a good day at the Sydney Football Stadium in front of my family, my wife and my 2 girls. It was terrific.
You've met some very interesting people during your career. Do you want to share some insights of these leaders? You've met the Queen, you've met Mandela, you've met well-known dignitaries. What's impressed you?
Look, just the opportunity that rugby gives you. I mean, we went to the Palace in 84, 88, 91. Obviously, I received the cup from her, and beforehand, I always remember getting the invitation to go to the Palace for lunch in 98. We've just sadly commemorated the 25th anniversary of Princess Di's passing in Paris. And, I remember that day, 31 August 97, very well. I mean, we were living in Paris. We went to church that morning, as we did, in the centre of Paris, and the Uniting Church, and there were cameras everywhere. And it so turned out that our minister had to do the last rites for Diana. She passed away about 4 a.m.
That's right, yeah.
But I think when I recollect on that, and I have so much admiration for the Queen, but I think her only mistake that I can remember was she went totally underground for various reasons. She passed away with, I don't need to go into the circumstances. Yep. She was divorced from or separated from her husband, and the Queen went underground. I think she went up to Balmoral and wasn't seen for 4 months. Yep. And not just Britain, but the Commonwealth were calling out for her, don't you have a response and a comment? And then she finally turned up at the Kensington Palace and saw that floral. Anyway, she later decided, or her staff decided, that she had to be more transparent. And so every month she invited 6 people for, nondescript people for lunch. And I got invited in 98, and it was fantastic. We had just such a wonderful lunch and a great catch up. And, I'd met a couple of her children, and it was just such a relaxed, enjoyable conversation. I did get cornered by her communications manager at the end, because we had, of course, had the referendum the next year, 99, on the monarchy or the republic, and they wanted to know what was my view. What did I think the Queen should do in relation to building support? And I was pretty forthright. But I remember, back then, I was. I said, look, I don't think the Queen or her husband should come down. She was on the nose. It's hard to remember,
I remember
because we all love her so much.
Yeah.
And we were in so much admiration, but she was totally on the nose. I said, if you're seriously trying to get support from Aussies, send the grandchildren. Because we all had that amazing sympathy from that funeral service for the grandchildren. But it was an amazing experience. You asked me what are some of the things. I mean, I think if you ask me along the same lines, who is the greatest mentor that I ever had, it would be Sir Nicholas Shahady. Sadly passed away about 5-6 years ago, but was a great Wallaby captain, a great Wallaby president, a great businessman. But he was the guy who was really the person behind the inaugural Rugby World Cup. And it was largely because we were losing so many players to rugby league, and he thought, I have to create a global event. And he took on the Northern Hemisphere with the support of New Zealand, South Africa, France. And he finally got one vote over the line. They think it was the English, but Nick Shahady was such an amazing person, a great mentor to me. He was the Lord Mayor of Sydney for a couple of years in the late 60s. Those sort of people I'll never forget. And of course, his wonderful wife, who was our governor for 13 years, still around, still doing great things. I mean, she's in her own right, Murray Bashir, one of the greatest, loveliest, nicest people that I know.
Just from your experience in leadership, Nick, what's the sort of constant theme you see? Is it humility?
Look, there's a lot of traits, but absolutely. It's vision. It's being able to harness the people around you and focus them and give them direction and get them all working together. Understanding their roles within the team. When I first became a lawyer, I'll always remember on the first day in 1986 going into the senior partner's office, thanking him firstly for employing me, but he knew me because my grandfather was a partner and he knew a little bit about me. And I'll never forget the first question I asked. I said, Mr. Holden, what sort of law do you think I should do? Would I be a good litigant? Because I enjoyed litigation. I enjoyed Rumpole of the Bailey and all that. Yeah. Would I be a good commercial lawyer? Would I be a property lawyer, a family lawyer? I'll never forget his response. He said, Nick, don't worry about the sort of law. He said, work out what sort of person you are. He said, there's finders, minders, binders, and grinders. And I think leadership is a part of understanding exactly what you're good at, not trying to be everything to everyone, but understanding that collegiately, corporately, you need the right people around you, the people who love doing stuff that you're not good at. and they won't be good at the stuff you do. So, I'm more of an originator in business. I'm the person who looks to do the deal, to structure the deal, to get the mandate. And then there's a whole bunch of other people that sit behind computers, do the financial modelling, but that's what they love. That's what they're really good at. They'll write the 40, 50-page credit paper. I don't like sitting behind the computer so much. I've got to be out there. I've got to be starting with stuff. I've got to be meeting people. I've got to be building the relationship. And so I think that's a part of leadership, and also making everyone feel accountable, everyone to feel responsible, even irrespective of titles, particularly junior people. And that comes back to what I said a little while ago about allowing them to vent their opportunity that they see. They don't feel discouraged to come up with an idea, come up with even if it doesn't work, even if you don't get it right. There's a million things that go into that, but don't overthink it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't overthink it. Let it come naturally. Remember what I said when I first became captain?
Yeah.
I overthought it because I didn't think I was justified, because I thought my cab was parked 7th or 8th in the rank. I was only a 26-year-old guy. There was the Poitevins and these guys in front of me.
Yeah.
Geez, I'm going to have to, what do I need to learn? Just be natural. Let it come out.
Why did he give you the...
I don't know. He never called me, remember?
I know, but didn't you ever ask afterwards?
Not really. No.
What do you reckon you got it?
He saw leadership qualities in me. He talked to people. He asked people like Dave Brockhoff, Michael Hawker, Rupert Rosenbloom, tell me about this bloke. And he obviously watched, when I was coached by Alan Jones, the way I played and the way I, as a scrum half, you've got to be a natural leader.
Yep. In your leadership style, when playing the game, how would you sum it up? There's all different styles, obviously you've got to adapt, got to be agile to use these words, but how would you sum yourself up?
Look, I was authoritative. I was a good talker to referees. I think I made my teammates comfortable. I mean, I've heard John Eales say many times when asked about the 91 World Cup, particularly going on as he was only 20 years of age, Ealesy, and he said, I was so nervous going out for the World Cup final. And he said, just before kickoff, I looked across and, he's probably 30 metres from me. And he said, I spotted Nick, and Nick was just smiling at me. And I've heard him say many times, so it's not me blowing my trumpet, but he just said, that relaxed me so much. And so I'd like to think that as I was an experienced player and the captain of the team, that when the junior guys looked at me in the way I, on and off the field, that I gave them confidence, that they knew that they were part of the team, that they were, make of it what you will. But to me, when John went on to be such a great player and such a great captain that he was, that I've heard him say that many times, I'm just very satisfied that that's the way he felt when we just swapped glances just before kickoff.
Pressure ever get to you?
Sure, but it's how you handle it.
And how do you?
Having the confidence that you've done the work, that in the big moments you'll get it right. The skills, the execution will come.
And when you were playing, did they have a lot of mental coaches in those days? Or
No,
exactly. So
no, I would have laughed it off. Look, one of the players' dads. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't need it. Don't get me wrong.
No,
I understand that some people do.
Yep.
And I'm absolutely. It's not a criticism that they do it all, because that's for them. And most individual professional players, tennis players, golfers have them.
That's right.
Because it's part of their armory. But no, I didn't need it. And don't get me wrong also, because I know that people go through ups and downs mentally, and a lot of people can go through some down times and depression and all that. And it's an acute thing at the moment. So I'm not laughing it off.
No. It's
just that, no, I never thought about it. I mean, one of my senior players, his dad was a psychiatrist in sports psychiatry.
Okay.
And there was one session that we did, and it was right towards the end of my career. And so I just agreed to it. But it wasn't going to happen again in the team that I led. Yeah. Make of that what you will, but no, it was rubbish.
Fair enough.
But at the same time, I preface that by I understand why people do it now, particularly in the professional game when they're absolutely looking to optimise their performances. And a lot of people in those lonely sports, individual sports, do go through ups and downs and do need to, there's a whole bunch of ways and new ways of, getting in the right headspace, you might say.
Is there a real mental strain, Nick, once you call it a day?
Not at all.
So when you ultimately called it a day, what's the sensation? Is it relief?
Only because we'd achieved what we had. Had we lost at Dublin when we fell behind with 4 minutes to go, as I said, I'd be totally frustrated because I would have known that individually and collectively we'd never reached our potential. I knew that was my last roll of the dice for World Cups. I mean, I had to get on and I had a couple of young kids and I had a business life to get on with. So, no, it's because we achieved everything apart from the Lions. But I got over it because the disappointment of the Lions taught us lessons that without that disappointment, we mightn't have won 2 years later in rugby's biggest prize.
Moving on from rugby, what's been your greatest achievement since?
Oh, look, I'd have to say the strength and the love that my wife and I have for each other and from that, the 4 wonderful kids that we got. And their achievements and, just the closeness that we have as a family. There's no doubt about that.
What's Stand Tall about?
Oh, look, my wife, 10 years ago, she was pretty badly impacted from how many funerals my 2 girls, who are now 31 and 29, had been to. And I probably don't have to go into the details of how those young girls died.
Okay.
But she thought, along with one of her good friends, that we've got to do something about it. It's a DGR registered not-for-profit. I chair the board. And we've had, in that 10 years, amazing growth. And we've impacted so many young lives. We get 14, 15, 16-year-olds to big school events. We typically get 6,500, 7,000 schools from right across Sydney and the environs, private schools, public schools. It's the range. We want to make sure everyone's included. We try to get year groups. We get amazing speakers, who often talk about life experiences they've been through and coming out positively, and they are the most inspiring speakers you'll ever hear. And, we see the impact from surveys, but also the feedback from the speakers. And it's about just filling young kids with hope, with resilience, with just understanding how bullying and online bullying can impact people, just understanding how to bounce back from disappointment, just to understand that you're not in the worst situation, that, that life's not as bad as you might think. And just, it's all about that. And it's looking at a better future forward. During COVID, we had the opportunity to live stream. And so we now reach nationally as opposed to just the attendees. We were asked by Bronnie Taylor, who's the New South Wales Minister for Mental Health, to do 3 regional events, which are coming up in late October, November. That's going to be Tamworth, Dubbo, Pambula down in the Bega area.
Yes.
So it just grows and grows and grows, and we're just making an impact. And I'm really proud of what my wife's achieved, and I love supporting it because at the end of the day, I think back to that 10 years, when we were having our first kids, when we were married, when I was spending a lot of time on rugby tours and absolutely focused on squeezing the lemon and getting all the drops out, how she supported me.
Yep.
So I just really enjoy how I can support her in all the connections that I can bring in, and the government support and corporate support and, for a not-for-profit. So it's great. And as I said, I'm very proud of my wife.
And what have you both learned through COVID, through this process?
Life hasn't changed dramatically for me. I've been going to the office every day. I feel that I'm an essential worker in the CBD. No, look, I just think it's easier for everything, just to get out early and come back later. But look, it's been tough. I lost mum and dad in the last couple of years. I mean, they both got to a good age though, 87. Look, I think the greatest thing I've learned is that, if one door closes, there's a great opportunity that another one opens.
Okay.
I mean, people can say, they use those strange words, pivot and all that sort of stuff. But to me, it's just, yes, there's been some disappointments, whether it's travel, and that closes down all our business opportunities sometimes because we invest and mainly lend in the global mining industry.
Yep.
But you've just got to be reactive. You've got to, sort of look at the doors that can be open in that time, look at the opportunities that can be had. My life is normally flat out with a whole bunch of things going on and events and dinners and all that. And sometimes, none of us went to anything for 18 months. And you can miss that and regret that, but also use that as an opportunity. What does time give you? You know, whether you want to do some reading, whether you want to do some study, whether you want to do, so look at the doors that open up and don't waste it.
And part of your experience when you left rugby is living in another country, isn't it? In France.
We lived in Paris. So I joined the French investment bank, Société Générale.
What did it bring to you?
Look, everything from mateship to, getting back to that finders, minders, binders and grinders, because to be honest, I went over there, couldn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture, hadn't studied commerce or economics. 3-4 months into, taking a young family away from Sydney, where I was very comfortable, where there's a million things happening, where I was in strong demand for a lot of things.
Yes.
To going over there, where particularly in Paris, you could pick your nose on the train, no one knew who you were, but it was challenging at first. And I really had to work hard, and I had to work out, I'm a finder and a minder. I have to surround myself with people to build a business, which we did. We opened a physical gold desk, did a lot of work in South Africa, particularly as the biggest, gold producer back in the 90s.
Yes.
Helped set up the mining finance team in London, which was specific on mining finance with all the technical skills required. So we ended up having a great 4 years there. But what took us home, and I ran the mining finance team in Sydney for 10 years after that, was I didn't want my kids to miss out on their grandparents. My dad was a big smoker in his life. I was amazed he got to 87. My father-in-law in 1983, when I met my wife, had his first triple bypass surgery. So what drove us back to Sydney, and we love coming back, of course, to family, was we didn't want the kids to miss out on grandparents. But thankfully, they lived for another 20 years.
Politics, Nick?
Look, I've been invited a couple of times.
Come on.
To save seats.
Yeah?
Oh, look,
How close were you?
Well, Bruce Baird called me in 2007. I'm from the Shire. Bruce was in Cook, where, of course, Scott Morrison ended up. He said, I've got the Prime Minister's endorsement. I said, Bruce, I was in South Africa at the time. I said, mate, I'm putting 4 kids through private school. That's my first excuse. It's 3 a.m. over here where you've called me. I'll call you back tomorrow and give you a bunch of others. And then I got a call from where I live now in Linfield when the then MP stood down, and similar story. I'm a big believer that I can hopefully make an impact away from politics in other areas. So I've done a lot of not-for-profit work over the years. I was on the City of Sydney Council for 4 years, I just don't want 24/7 to be covering my back.
No, I was just wondering, Nick, what your thoughts are regarding the political discourse and debate that we're having this day and age. It's very personalised.
It is, and that's, I don't like that. Look, I'm interested in politics. I enjoy. I don't watch a lot of TV, and get to read some papers, but I do enjoy listening to radio, and I'm interested in the political debate. And I have pretty strong views, no doubt about that. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think it's important too. But look, I wouldn't disagree. I think the attack on people and not just being able to elevate eloquently your views, your strong views, and being able to back it up with strong argument. I think we're really lacking in that, and it's really disappointing. I mean, I won't go into any particular people, but whether praiseworthy or negatively, but no doubt there's too much of that. And I'd love to see really strong leaders, who can just get on without attacking the opposition. I went to a Sydney Business Forum yesterday and Chris Mintz spoke. And, I've met Chris. Yeah. And one of the things I was really impressed with is he actually spoke about how when he became leader going through the COVID period, he led his party in not attacking then Gladys Berejiklian on particularly health decisions, the need to be bipartisan in a lot of those decisions which were being guided by the health advice that the Premier was receiving, and understanding what a precarious situation it was and how a lot of people were very troubled, and making those decisions and leading his party that we are not going to attack unless there's a clear situation where we disagree with a decision that one of the ministers has made within the governing party. I was very impressed with that because we just haven't seen enough of that sort of stuff where you get bipartisan support.
Yeah, look, I think it seems to be that Australians are calling for that type of leadership, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, and there's no doubt about that, and and that's what I like. And again, it's the attack that comes on sporting leaders and sporting coaches.
Well, what about just on that? This might be a little bit topical, but it's interesting. The likes of Israel Folau.
Oh, look, Israel, he came over to see me. Someone said to come over, and it's the first time I met him. He came over to my house.
Yep.
And we had a couple of hours together, and so I fully understood, as someone who's a strong believer myself, I'm a churchgoer.
Yep.
I understand, and I read the Bible every day. At least I try to, and so it's my faith, and my wife's the same. It's a very important part of our life. So I fully understood.
Absolutely.
It was shortly after, I think there was a decision made in the Tasmanian Parliament on a gender issue, which was a really strange one, because I asked Israel about it. What made him put that text up, or whatever you call those things? I'm not on social media. And he said, look, I was really concerned and troubled about the implications of sin. And I just wanted to let people know what the Bible said about sin, and so that they understood that there were ramifications. Now, at the same time, my only criticism of Israel, but I fully understood why he did it, because he loved people. It wasn't to be critical of people. It wasn't to be, those 8 particular sins that I think were in that Bible verse.
Yes.
It was because he loved people. And so I got that, but most people didn't, because they just saw it as an absolute criticism and just saying to people that if you commit any of these sins, you're going to hell. And per se, I can understand that. I think the only problem and the only mistake that Israel made, there's a lot of other ways to tell people about the love of Jesus Christ and God. And it's about, you can go to a whole bunch of verses that talk about the love of God for mankind, that he sent his only son to hang on a cross for forgiveness of sin. Yep. I'd much prefer a positive thing like that than talking about the implications of sin. But you've got to remember that Israel's father, is a bit different. He ran a church, and he was a bit of a, sort of a lightning bolt thrower and all that sort of stuff. And he encouraged his kid along that line. So there's probably reasons. And for that reason, I'd be slightly critical of Israel for the way he went about it. As I just said, Greg, there's much better ways to tell people about the love of God.
But should they be persecuted, do you think?
No,
Nick?
not at all.
Based in a democracy
Not
with
at all.
freedom of speech?
Not at all. He can be criticised, but he was hung out to dry, and he lost his job out of it. And I think Rugby Australia, they lost the court case, and it cost them a lot of money. And I think if they had their time over again, they'd do it differently.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch how that all played out, wasn't it?
Sure.
What's next for you, Nick?
Oh, look, mate, I as I said, I've just turned 60 a few months ago. I'm a grandfather. There's a lot left for me. I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't really care. I live life for the next day and the next week. There's a couple of bigger plans, but
Go on,
I want to stay busy.
What's some of those big plans?
Oh, no, but the big plans are hopefully to have, lots of grandchildren.
Yeah.
To stay busy, to stay with the work I currently do, which is managing money on behalf of US investors, successfully lending and investing in the global mining space.
Still
I
enjoying
love
it?
that because of the diversity of it, the diversity of people, the diversity of countries, the diversity of projects, the diversity of commodities, but really the connectivity in the industry and the interest around the industry and the people mainly. So I've got no intention of leaving Taurus. I love the people that I work with, but I like the not-for-profit stuff. We talked about Stand Tall. I enjoy the boards that I sit on, and who knows what's around the corner. I lived in Paris for 4 years. If I was ever invited to be the ambassador for Australia in Paris, I'd think seriously about it. Because I think, unlike some of the people that we launch into these, which is sometimes payback for political careers, some of these people, they go up there and I don't think they add a lot of value.
Mm.
Whereas I've lived in France, they love sport, they love rugby, I've got great connections. To me, it's about connecting countries, it's about connecting businesses, about connecting opportunities. I think I do a great job at that. But is that an ambition? No, not at all. But I'm just saying if something like that came up, I could think about another couple of years overseas.
Nick, if you're looking back at that young man making his debut for Sydney Uni, what advice would you give him now?
I'd just do the same stuff. I was really fortunate in my upbringing in, being the middle of 2 boys. So I became very competitive. I loved winning. I think I was a reasonable loser too. But again, I come back to that preparation that my life stood me in good stead to be able to be that person who, at the age of 60, didn't die wondering how good he could be in sport. I mightn't be as good as I could have been in other areas of life, but in sport, no regrets.
On that, Nick, thanks very much for your time today.
Pleasure, Greg.
You've been listening to No Limitations.